Alright, here we're going to talk about cellular energy production. And cellular respiration is the process of developing or creating energy for the cell. And it is often the term used to describe how a cell derives energy to do what it needs to do. Unlike breathing, we think about our lungs pulling oxygen in, but cells are going to use oxygen in order to make energy. Metabolism is the sum of all reactions that occur within a cell. When we hear metabolism, we often think of the big picture of the food we eat in regulation or relation to our weight and exercise. But it has much to do with the microscopic side of things. Much of our food gets broken down into smaller components, and it is the smaller components that are used to make energy and new cells. Metabolism is made of two types of major reactions. One is catabolism, or catabolic reactions, that occur when food is taken into our body and then broken down into smaller molecules. So you have that catastrophic event where something is broken down. And the other type of reaction where small components are used to make macromolecules that are used to make new cells. And these are anabolic reactions. Anabolic steroids aid in creating more muscle mass. Alright, so important components of this process. The enzymes. Alright, you have to have enzymes in order to have different reactions occur in the cells, and so therefore enzymes are the doers within the cell. Most enzymes are proteins, and they really act like machines. And you have the enzyme down here in blue, and you're going to have a substrate that comes in, sits in that active site, and you have this complex of the enzyme and the substrate, and the end product are these two pieces that are now two pieces instead of one. And then the enzyme is released and it goes on to do the same thing over and over again. And so it's this process of this enzyme constantly breaking this molecule down into two smaller pieces. Or over here you have synthesis, where two pieces or two substrates come together at the enzyme and are created into one product. Alright. There are specific molecules that enzymes work on. And so here you see this enzyme is blue. It's going to act on the orange substrate, whereas this enzyme is red. And it's going to act on these two substrates. They are very specific. It's like a lock and key scenario. You've got lots of locks, you have lots of keys, but they don't work well together. You have to have the one specific key for the one specific lock. Right? And enzymes are not used up in a reaction. They are going to be recycled and can be used over and over again. Right? So how do cells actually get energy? Right? Because our cells need a constant source of energy to be able to fuel the many reactions that are necessary every second of every hour, every day of our life. So cells are going to produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate, or they're going to burn sugars or fats, and both of these processes are going to utilize enzymes to dismantle food, to break them down. They take off the electrons, leaving CO2. And you have this whole process here of food moving, or oxygen moving in, glucose moving in, and this organelle here is the mitochondria. Alright, and as you see from the description up here, mitochondria and cellular metabolism, within eukaryotic cells, that is where energy production is made, within the mitochondria. So oxygen and glucose go to the mitochondria Glucose gets broken down through the process of glycolysis, and then pyruvate gets broken down, and you have electrons that are going to be transferred by NADH, right, into this process here. The NADH molecule is transferred from the process of glycolysis to the mitochondria. NADH broken down from the citric acid cycle, taken to the mitochondria, and you have the electron transport chain. And this is a very detailed process. All right, not one that I'm not going to require you to know because it's just too much information for this level of class. But what you do need to know is that cells make ATP. All right, you've got 2 molecules of ATP here, 2 molecules of ATP from this reaction here, the citric acid cycle, and then 32 molecules of ATP from the electron transport chain within the mitochondria. And so that's why a lot of times mitochondria are referred to as powerhouses of the cells, because that's where you're going to have most energy produced. All right, so the electrons come off and they move through to the oxygen. All right, now, differences between anaerobic and aerobic exercise. You've got 2 choices for energy. All right, one, you have a low enough demand, and so you can burn the fuel. If you have high demand, you have to use your batteries. So you can burn fuel if you have oxygen, and that's going to be aerobic exercise. However, fat can only be burned. Sugars can be the battery since they don't need oxygen to burn part of it away. All right, what if you can't keep up on the oxygen demand? All right, electrons keep building up with no oxygen to collect them. All right, electrons can be put into a sugar derivative, the pyruvate. Right, but when you have pyruvate and electrons mixing, you create lactate or lactic acid. So when you go and run a half a marathon without practicing, without training for it, and you actually make it through the race, you're going to be hurting before the race ends, but definitely that evening or the next day. And why has that occurred? Right? Because your muscle cells were not trained and your lungs were not trained to supply your cells with enough oxygen. And so then your cells are still working, but there's not enough oxygen, so they're creating lactic acid. And that lactic acid is an irritant to your muscle cells. And what you've actually gone through is anaerobic exercise that makes lactate instead of water, because you got to put the electrons someplace to make the ATP. All right, so anaerobic exercise, there's not enough oxygen for the demand. You get 2 ATPs from using your battery, and the electrons yield lactate or lactic acid instead of water. So in summary, bacteria and human cells are different, but they do have some similar features. Your cell membranes are semi-permeable, and that is going to limit the entrance and exit of different molecules. Cells have to be small, so needs can be met by diffusion, right? That simple movement in and out of cells. The cell skeleton is there for structure and movement, and you have 3 major molecules or protein molecules that are going to be the major players within that cell skeleton. And then energy comes from burning food. All right, you've got to remember that enzymes do the job for that. And you have fat or sugar plus oxygen gives you CO2, water, and ATP. All right, anaerobic exercise, you've got minimal amount of oxygen. You have sugar still, and that creates lactate and less ATP. So, having aerobic activity, more energetic in terms of more ATP is going to be produced versus anaerobic exercise.